Our first speaker is Jay Coady from NOAA. Jay is an environmental scientist with NOAA's Office of Response and Restoration. Jay supports the Southeast Assessment Restoration Division with natural resource damage assessment cases and is the project lead for ERMA. And Jay has worked with ORNR for over 10 years, starting with the Deepwater Horizon spill. So without any further ado, Jay Coady will give us updates on the Environmental Response Manager application we all know as ERMA. Jay, are you out there and ready to go? I see you.
I am out here. Hopefully you can hear me.
I can hear you and I can see your presentation. So I will sign off till about 2 minutes before the end of your talk.
Thank you, Judd. Okay, hello everyone. My name is Jay Coady, as Judd mentioned. I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and I support the Office of Response and Restoration Assessment Restoration Division. So my work involves ERMA application development, natural resource damage assessments, and from time to time, working on emergency response, as well as supporting the marine debris program. So kind of across many different line offices within ORNR. Here. So for today, I want to focus on ERMA development, what went on in 2020 is in regards to response and NERDA activities, 2020 ERMA development enhancements, and where we're going in 21 for development. I do have a number of slides in here that are just basics. A number of people have probably seen them. I'm going to kind of flip through them really quick, but I want them to be included. If someone were to download this presentation, that they would have this reference material. So the next couple of slides, just stick with me for a minute. ERMA is NOAA's Common Operational Picture. It's web-based, and we use it pretty much to analyze and visualize environmental information related to environmental hazards. We support a broad range of activities from emergency response, damage assessments, and as I mentioned, marine debris. So we have a broad range of uses. ERMA is broken up into 8 separate regions. It is all the same application, just the data itself can be broken down so there's not too much information in one region. And these are shown here, along with the ERMA URLs to reach them. All that you need to get to ERMA is an internet connection and a newer browser. To get an ERMA count, there's some information here, and that's the only background of the slide. So, focusing on 2020 and NERDA activities and response, key in 2020 was remote support. We didn't have anyone on scene that was doing ERMA data management. We did have staff on scene following emergency response activities, but all the ERMA loading and maintenance and management was done remotely. So it was a thing that, as long as we had a good tie into the command post and connections with the data and our partnerships, we were able to support these responses remotely. Additionally, our integration with NESDIS, ResponseLink, Diver, and GNOME, we were able to leverage those tie-ins so that any of those applications could send information to ERMA and not have a data manager in the middle. It helped with managing all these activities. In 2020, there was a number of emergency responses, hurricane response, and natural resource damage assessments. Jordan touched on a number of them. I'll just touch on a couple of them, focusing mostly how ERMA was leveraged for them. The first one was the Golden Ray, which was an incident down in Brunswick, Georgia, for a very large container ship or vessel that capsized and was stuck in the port of St. Simon Sound. Then we did a number of hurricane responses. Delta, Laura, Sally, and Zeta were the primary ones where we actually stood up a system to collect electronic data capture. And then we did a number of natural resource damage assessments, and a lot of that just dealt with spatial data across the U.S., working with our trustee partners, both state and federal partners. I don't have too much information on that because a lot of the information can't be made publicly available at the moment. But for the Golden Ray, St. Simon Sound incident, as I mentioned, it was a vessel that capsized following a hurricane. It was just improperly loaded. But you'll see here in IRMA what we've been doing for quite some time now is pulling in the SCAT. So they do SCAT segments. We have the vessel location, the marine safety zone, and then they're capturing DART days, debris days, essentially. So they'll walk the shoreline and see if there's any debris and kind of capture that as like a SCAT type activity. Because this is a vessel they're cutting up, there's expected to be more debris than anything else. So you'll see here, these are some pictures that are available through the St. Simon Sound Incident Response.com. Pretty impressive pictures. But you'll see here they're cutting this container ship in half or in many pieces and then hauling off the pieces. And like I said, we're capturing if there's any oil releases or if there are any debris on the shoreline. We're capturing all that information along with a lot of the environmental dolphin or mammal sampling. So another picture from IRMA, you'll see here they have the containment net up. This is a Worldview 2 satellite image before they started cutting up the vessel. So they have a kind of a little bit of a series of imagery from Worldview 2 as the process kind of went on over a course of a number of years. Hurricanes of 2020, not so bad as the year with Hurricane Irma, Maria, and those, but still kept us busy. This was predominantly remote support. As I mentioned before, all the IRMA data management work was done either by staff in Seattle, Silver Spring, or myself here in Charleston. We did have a contractor on scene, and our NOAA SSCs were down in the Gulf coordinating with the Coast Guard and with our contractors. So the key point of this is that we leveraged Survey 123 and the ARC Collector app for tracking target status, and we worked with EPA's AGOL system to do this, and I'll talk more about a future of that on our end. And then a new component, part of Hurricane 2020, was the dashboard. So we have IRMA dashboards, which I'll also dig into a little more detail, but they were available for tracking the Survey 123 data. One of the things, too, we did with the Marine Debris Program was looking at where the debris was. So you'll see here on the right side, there's pictures of different shoreline areas, and then their categories with either single target or densely packed targets. So the purple is the densely packed targets. Might be a little hard to see here, but these are all white dots along inside this purple line. The red line is moderately dense targets, and you'll see it's not as as many debris items. And so that's the AOI within this reddish line. And so this was a product derived to help with either supplemental funding or removal down the road. I mentioned dashboards. So this is the Coast Guard target tracking for Hurricane Sally. This was done by county. So this is the Santa Rosa, Florida County. And you'll see here we have a total number of targets. This image here was captured after the response ended. So there are no red, orange, or blue targets. All have kind of either been cleared out or just signed off. So that's why you'll see the green items have 189. But dashboards are an interactive tool. I mentioned I'll get into them in a little more detail when I talk about the development items, but the dashboards are an interactive tool that kind of just will display these summary stats pretty easily, and they can be customized to a great extent. Another thing, working with remote sensing after hurricanes, especially doing remote support, was the imagery. So we had the NOAA NGS imagery that we always pull in after hurricanes, and then we also had the NCIB imagery. And here's just a screen capture of what looks to be like a spill after one of the hurricanes in the Gulf. And you can look at this as compared to before. before storm imagery, and then what it looked like after, and you'll see quite a bit of flooding in that area, and same in this area where you have in the bottom left picture, it looks like a berm surrounding a couple tanks, and then after the storm, the berm is completely inundated, and those tanks are actually floated away from the containment berm. So those are some examples of ways targeted pollution threats. Also, as always, we've continued to update geographic response strategies across the country. So back in 2015, George Grettinger and a number of other people from the Spatial Data Branch worked on doing a pretty big inventory, and so this is still ongoing. We have the inventory complete, but just kind of ongoing, working with local regions to keep their GRSs updated. And one thing to note is we updated the geographic response strategies around the Golden Ray, the capsized vessel, following some of the response activities that fed back into the updates. And we worked with Florida Fish and Wildlife on that. So I mentioned NESDIS, ResponseLink, and Diver as far as leveraging the ERMA's data API, and that data API allows these applications to push in and make new data layers in ERMA. And so there's a couple examples I'll run through. Looking at ResponseLink, ResponseLink will push a layer into ERMA every time there's a response link created by an SSC. This is a filtered layer for all the 2020 responses, zoomed out kind of far, because as Jordan mentioned on Monday, there was a pretty big deal, a larger international effort last year than other years past. But in all, it's about 189 or so incidents shown across the country here. NESDIS is another application or system that pushes data into ERMA. You're probably well familiar with the MPSRs, and I believe Juan spoke the other day on these, but they're being pushed into ERMA every time a report's generated, and so ERMA is maintaining a pretty good catalog of all this data. Diver, for those that are familiar with Diver, Diver is a data warehouse that NOAA uses to store and catalog a bunch of information, chemistry information, and that information can be sent to ERMA to visualize spatially. So looking at ERMA development for last year, we worked on dashboards, Google Analytics. We increased our support for feature services, add map data, query enhancements, and spot weather forecast. But a lot of our work was spent putting some attention to the back end, and that was updating the server-side code and optimizing our Amazon web environment architecture. We do not have an operating system now that ERMA runs on, so that creates a lot less overhead and less downtime for any updates going on in the future. So we've really set ourselves up for more sustainability going forward, and I'll talk more about how we're going to look at sustainability in the future in the next for 21. But looking at some of these enhancements, the dashboards is most notably the biggest enhancement that was rolled out. This was funded by the Marine Debris Program to kind of really track debris targets and following storms, or even for part of their collection programs. But you'll see here, this is just a demo dashboard for the DARP cases, the damage assessment, remediation, restoration cases. But you'll see here, there's a wide range of charts that you can put in. There's icons you can put in. There's logos we can put in. And then there's a number of different types of charts and stat cards that can be scaled in there. These individual cards can be tied to the map, so that if a user zooms into a location on a map, these cards would update to the numbers that would be in the map extent. So there's a lot of flexibility and functionality within these, and they are tied to ERMA data layer permissions. So if there are publicly available dashboards, but there is also restricted dashboards, and it depends on your ERMA credentials on what you see. Here's another example of ERMA dashboard. Once again, another demo one, but this is looking at the St. Simon Sound Golden Ray incident, and you'll see here, this is looking at some of the SCAT shoreline miles and breakdowns of what they've observed, whether it be heavy, light, or moderate oiling. And then we have some what we call list cards, where it just tells you what the potential scat cumulative oiling category might be, and then how many meters of total for very light and no oiling, and et cetera, et cetera. Once again, here's a dashboard for Hurricane Laura. This is that same debris layer I was talking about, where they identified the density of debris layers. And you'll see here in the cards, you can kind of see how many targets there might be, if there's how many acres, and so on and so forth. So just another way to look at the data. And once again, it may look a little fuzzy zoomed out in this map extent, but if you zoom in, all these would update accordingly. One of the other items we rolled out in last year was Google Analytics. Just a quick screen capture of some of the analytics we're capturing. It's not necessarily who is doing what, it's what is being done in ERMA. So we were curious to know how much certain parts of the application are being used, what certain data layers are people looking at, not who's looking at them. So we kind of captured this information with various parts of the application, the ERMA layers, bookmarks, and what you search for. So just to give us better feedback in the future on what we should pay attention to for development purposes. The spot weather forecast is a end user enhancement. It's part of a map tools. You click on the little lightning bolt in the map, click on the map, and then you'll get a little pop-up where you get the spot location for that. If you click out in the ocean, you'll get a marine forecast from the Weather Service. Adding local data, this has been discussed, I believe, before on a number of presentations, but there's a little tab by the login window where it says add map data. And this is all based on your browser session. So when you close out of ERMA, the data is lost. It's all stored within your cache. So looking forward on FY21, I mentioned sustainability before. We're working currently on updating the UI code. We did the server-side code, and we're looking to redo the UI code right now, updating the language that's a newer version, and being able to that'll set us up to be able to reskin ERMA in 22. So you might get a whole new look and feel next year once we get some of these underlying UI code updates. A couple of the other big areas we're focusing on are ESI. So there's a NOAA put on a virtual ESI workshop earlier this year. I think it was back in January. And a number of things came out of that. ERMA got some funding to do ESI improvements, and part of that, we're looking to flatten all the data tables, create a more uniformed data source, and part of some of the ERMA enhancements involves using vector tiles to display the data. And all this, we're looking for basically almost an enterprise type solution for ESI data. And so there'll be some legacy things, but going forward, we're building the architecture and infrastructure to kind of pull in the data, standardize it, and then be able to push it back out more so it can be shared and just disseminated. We're also looking, or we're standing up a NOAA AGOL portal electronic data capture server. I mentioned for the hurricanes last year that we used EPA's AGOL system, but for NOAA, for damage assessments and response activities, NOAA's doing this so that it can be a medium security system instead of a low security system, because AGOL is predominantly low. And this will give us the ability to have more restricted data. So this is all Survey 123, ARC Collector, Field Map apps that teams go out in the field, collect data, and then it go back to NOAA's AGOL portal server and then out to ERMA. We do have plans to work on ERMA draw updates, nothing major going there, just working through the workflow a little more seamlessly. And then another item that will come from this in the future, but we signed an agreement with National Weather Service. They're standing up a common operational picture to disseminate weather data, and they're using the ERMA code base, and they're a couple months out from having a public beta version. And so you'll see a lot of similarities there. their development team has collaborated with us and are maintaining a consistent code base so that, you know, each team can benefit from other teams' work, and more people that use the code eventually will benefit broader ERMA. So more to come on it, and National Weather Service ERMA collaboration. I did talk about the ESIs, but this is the ESI tool in ERMA. And then the electronic data capture, whether it be just from Apple tablet or iPhone or whatever. And I believe that is my last slide. Yep. So.
All right. Thank you, Jay. I have a question for you. In the beginning, you mentioned browser. You should use a modern browser. Can you elaborate what browsers should be used and what browsers should not be used? For instance, there may be some issues with Firefox.
I'm not aware of anything with Firefox. I know that we can't really support Internet Explorer, so we predominantly support Edge, Firefox, and Chrome. Even Safari works well with ERMA. There is a known print issue when you try to do an ERMA print on Safari, it won't work. But aside from that, Safari works. So.
Okay, thank you. Lindsay? I see some questions, or is it? Yes, Lindsay.
We have two questions from Susan Krella. If user uploaded shape files to ERMA are only saved for the duration of the session, how can we make them permanent? For example, info from the ACP.
So as I showed the different ERMA regions here, if there is any formal data to be made permanent in ERMA, we'd always recommend working with your regional ERMA lead. And so from the Gulf of Mexico, it's myself and George. Southwest is Matt Dorsey. Pacific Northwest is also Matt. And then Atlantic would be like Rob Wright, and Great Lakes would be like Rob Wright. So if you need any points of contact, reach out to the your NOAA SSC, and then from there we can get it to the appropriate person. But the reason why we don't keep the local data permanent is because it's just a government policy. You can't be publishing data, or users can't necessarily be publishing data on a government application without being approved. So that's why it's only stored in a browser session.
Thanks. And one more question from Susan. Are there plans to integrate current info from SunCruise and other ocean observing systems?
Yeah, and we have in the past worked with the USCG, and we did pull in a number of their products into ERMA over time. It's just a matter of going back and maintaining those data connections. And so it is something we will continue to do so. And I think Rob Wright was primarily the point of contact on that.
Okay, well, thank you, Jay. And I'll just point out that, yeah, the HF radar data is out there. I know it's in Southwest. I assume it's in all the ERMAs.
Yep.